Hello all you amazing people out there in YouTube land. I'm back. Anyway, hey, today we're doing a really short, simple, fast video on how to measure a spring rate on a spring. Because I don't know what the spring rate on this spring is, and I've got to know that in order to design the part that this spring is going to be used in. And so this is very, very simple. And what all we have to do, springy, boingy, 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 boingy. Okay, all we have to do is be able to put a load on the spring and see how far it moves when we put that load on it. Or conversely, if we move it a certain distance and we can measure how much force it takes to do that, then from those two numbers we can get the spring rate. And the spring rate is just a number that allows us to calculate or predict what the spring is going to do when we use it in a certain way. Like for instance, we're going to compress it an inch. Well, how much force does it take to compress it an inch? And so if you know the spring rate, you just take your inch and you multiply it by that number, whatever the spring rate is. In engineering, it's called K. If you're doing algebra, it's called M. It's just the slope on a linear equation. And so what I've got here is a very simple little setup. Just made a little bracket, just knocked this together in 5 minutes or so to hold this dial indicator. What it does is, well, of course, when I run this down, it'll compress the spring, and then of course the dial indicator will give us a reading as to how far it displaced. And this is the load cell out of the scale. You've probably recognized this from the dyno videos because it's the same scale. All we're going to do here is all I did here is I just bolted the load cell to the mill table just because it made it a lot more rigid than the squishy plastic of the way the scale is normally made. Makes things a little more accurate. So the first thing we got to do is we've got to make a chart. And here's our chart. It's got nothing in it yet. What we're going to do is, the first thing we need to do is we need to measure how much force the plunger on the dial indicator puts out. I mean, when we displace it 100 thou and then 200 thou and 300 thou, because that's a spring too. And so when this spring is on there, we've actually got two springs pushing down on our load cell. We got the spring we're testing, and we got the spring in the dial indicator. And so what we're going to do is we're going to measure the dial indicator first, go down in 100,000th increments, and that will tell us, that'll give us a set of coordinates at, say, 300 thousandths compression on the dial indicator plunger. Then we'll have some load. And we'll put that in our little chart. And what we'll do is we'll subtract, this is our dial indicator spring load. This is the first one we're filling in. Once we have that full of numbers, then we can put the real spring on there. But we'll do that, and once we put the real spring on there, we'll have a big number, and we'll have a little number, and we'll subtract the little number from the big number. That'll give us our corrected number. Then you divide that number by that number, and that's your spring rate. Pretty simple, huh? Anyway, so let's get this done. I'm going to slide this under here. So, and now we got to tip this down a little bit so that you can see the scale. And this is going to come down. Well, boy, let's see here. I think we can get it all in the frame. Just barely. Okay, we can get in the frame. All right, let's see here. Right now, we got to bring our dial indicator down to our 0 point, which is right there, about. And then we're going to turn on our scale. Then Chris has to find his pen. Ha! I found it. There's my pen. All right, so now that we've got this, let us go down our 100 thou and we'll see where we're at. I'm going to go through this fast because I'm going to speed this up. So here we go. Okay, now we're done with our measurements of our dial indicator spring load. Here's our column of numbers. And now we're going to put the spring on there. And we're going to go to that exact same set of coordinates to fill in this column here, the indicated load. Or I should put actually the indicated force, but I already wrote out this chart, so we're just going to say load. But force is really what we're measuring here. So let's do that real quick. The little bolt is just because my plunger isn't long enough. So that's just a spacer. So what we're going to do is put that up under there. This will come in very handy when, you know, the end of the world happens, which of course seems like it's imminent given the whole Ukraine situation. Hopefully we're not headed into real World War III, but we can only hope, right? Okay, so here we go. We've got our spring in there. We're zeroed out again. Now we're going to go down in 100,000ths increments. Now, one of the things I really should point out here is that if the spring was perfectly linear, we could do this with one measurement. We don't have to do it in 100,000ths increments. But seeing as it's an unknown spring, I don't really know whether it's linear or not. So if I made one measurement where I only compress it 100,000ths and then assume that it's linear and build a device where I'm compressing it like 2 inches, it could be really far off because it may not really be perfectly linear. So I'm doing a lot of measurements, but it isn't really necessary in most circumstances. So here we go. All right. It kind of doesn't really want to stay going straight there, which is kind of making this not work as well as I was hoping it would. Let's see if we can get it. There may be some inaccuracy on our top 3 numbers. Yeah, I'm not going to call that a good reading. I'm just going to call that good. All right, either way, that's how we do it. Now we got to go do a little math. And presto, that's what we get. So here we go. These are our basic numbers. And this is actually a different chart, but it's the same spring, it's the same numbers because I can do that all in one shot. Anyway, and so what we're doing here is we took this number, subtracted that number. This is the total load, the spring and the dial indicator together. We subtract the dial indicator spring load, which is this number here, the 13 grams. That gives us our corrected load. Then we take our corrected load and we divide it, in this case, by 0.100. That gives us our spring rate. It's 2,660 grams to the inch. So if I compress that spring an inch, it's going to take 2,660 grams to do it. If I compress it 2 inches, it'll take twice that to do it. Now we go down another notch to 200,000ths, if that makes sense. And we're subtracting that number from that number. 558 minus 26 gives us 532. Then we're taking 532 and dividing by 0.200. And guess what? We get 2660. Now, this isn't a perfect setup, as you can guess. And so we're going to get some variation here. And if you want to be super precise, and of course the last 3 went totally to crap because the spring was squirming sideways. So I'm not really counting these as accurate measurements. But you can basically see that your spring rate in this particular case is basically constant. And you could average all these numbers together if you wanted to, but I'm not going to do that. And that's it. That's all there is to it. There's only one thing about springs that I find really counterintuitive. It's a little nuance that a lot of people don't understand. And so let me throw that in here real quick and then we'll be done with this video. What happens when you cut a spring is you actually increase the spring rate. And I would cut this spring, but I need this spring for my project, so I'm not going to cut it. If I cut this in half, we would basically double the spring rate. Well, let me explain why that is. If we compress this spring, say an inch, okay, and then we were to count all the coils on the spring, which I'm not going to do, let's say it's, I don't know, let's say it's 10 coils just to make it easy. Well, if we compress this an inch and there's 10 coils, that means that each coil compressed 1/10 of an inch. You see where I'm going with that? And it took 2,660 grams of force to get it to do that. Well, if you have half as many coils, then it only moves half the distance, even though you've put 2,660 grams of force on it. So when you cut your springs, like in your car and your suspension, to lower it, you're increasing the spring rate when you do that. And that's why. That's kind of counterintuitive, but that's how it works. And that's all there is to this video. It's done. Thanks for watching. I'll have some more videos up soon. I'm sorry I've been gone so long, but I'm back. So have a great rest of your days, guys. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate your time. Take care.